Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now we're going to move into some very uncontroversial territory. I'd like to talk about anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. And I'd like to know where it is and what it looks like. 0345 60 60 973. The factionalism, the sort of football team style support of politics in this country at the moment is, as you know, a source of never-ending gloom to me. But I don't have any skin in the game, so to speak, in the context of this anti-Semitism story. I know that somebody like Len McCluskey will claim that it is a problem that's being inflated by the right-wing media to make it a problem. But, of course, that doesn't really account for why a Labour council leader would mention it when quitting her post. It seems to me that some people close to Jeremy Corbyn have in the past been responsible for some pretty gross comments regarding Israel in particular, Jewish people in general. The Sunday Times reported, apparently erroneously, that an alleged Holocaust denier was being readmitted to the party. Metro chased up the Sunday Times story and were apparently told that this fellow wasn't being reinstated. I think this is the next big one. There's a Holocaust denier who's just been accepted as a candidate for the Republican Party in America. I said at the beginning of last year in an interview, I think with the New Statesman, that if Holocaust denial turned out to be the next post-truth development, if it turned out to be the next alternative facts, this world we've created, which Kellyanne Conway and Donald Trump in America and the usual suspects in this country, Jacob Rees-Mogg, actually most recently joining their ranks, can simply present falsehoods as facts or claim that anything that doesn't fit their own warped worldview is somehow fake, then it leaves the doors absolutely gaping for Holocaust denial to move back into the mainstream of public conversation. And do you know, if you had told me 2 years ago that I would say that out loud on this programme, I would have told you to get over yourself and calm down. It just seemed to me that that would be, for all of us, a step too far. Actual Holocaust denial. But I'm seeing it on social media a lot. The Times journalist Hugo Rifkind has tried to do battle with some of the people disseminating it, and it's moving back to the mainstream. What kids like me never really understood when we were growing up during a period of unprecedented and unparalleled peace was how fragile it always is, and how the forces of violence and hatred are always just sniffing around the edges, seeking relevance, seeking adequacy. If you had told me to, I think I would have laughed at Holocaust denial being an actual thing again in the context of British or American politics. I didn't really know enough about the neo-Nazi movement. I was very slow on the uptake with the websites and the online pseudo-journalism that has fermented and fostered this environment, but I know where it's led. And what I like about this, in terms of a conversation that we can have together, is it's not left-right. So this is a Labour Party having a problem with alleged Holocaust denial and the Republican Party in America. So this isn't actually one of those easy fights to pick. We should all be on the side of a boring Holocaust denial. But then I used to think we were all on the side of a boring sex offenders. Now we can hear a man boasting about being one on tape and then watch him win the White House. We used to, I thought, all agree about paedophilia, but you can have a Republican candidate accused of it running for office being endorsed by British politicians. The things that I used to think we could all agree on, we don't, guess what, all agree on. We just don't. Is there anything we can all agree on? I would have thought Holocaust denial. But who's going to disassociate themselves with the Republican Party in America because they've put a Holocaust denier on the ballot? Well, I once would have thought everybody would. What I don't know is what it looks like in the Labour Party. I don't want you to shoot me down, but I think it does exist in the Labour Party, but it's based more upon intuition and insight than it is upon evidence and experience, which is the opposite of how I like to operate. 0345 60 60 973 is the number that you need. The question is, Where is it and what does it look like? And I know that sounds a bit thick, but entry level for me, the reason that I say I believe it exists is because of the people that say so. The journalists, the commentators, the members of the Labour Party that claim it's a massive problem. And I think I understand where that problem comes from. I think that conflation of Israel with Jewish people is very, very, very hard to avoid. And when you stop trying to avoid it, I think you do become anti-Semitic. I've also had a bit of a crash course in anti-Semitism myself over the last couple of years because I've seen how close to the surface that kind of rhetoric is. And again, I've spent my entire life thinking that Holocausts happened to creatures that somehow belong to a different species from us. When I say Holocaust happened, I mean the people who perpetrated the Holocaust were a different species from us. People murdered, they were the same. But the people who did it, the people who undertook Holocausts, I always thought, very naively, you know that line, it couldn't happen here. I don't think that anymore. You just need to see the way that social media in this country allows people to speak about Muslims, and you can see easily how lynch mobs and pogroms and Holocausts are perfectly within the capabilities of modern Western humans. And that's why it sickens me to think that the Labour Party might provide it with some sort of haven. So just give me a call now, for whether you're a fully paid up member of Momentum or whether you still worship at the altar of Tony Blair. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need to tell me whether the Labour Party has a problem with anti-Semitism. But I don't see how, if you're ringing to tell me that it doesn't, I don't see how you can prove that. Whereas if you're ringing to tell me that it does, all you've got to do is provide me with one instance of it. Do you see what I mean about it being a slightly skewed argument? You can't prove that something doesn't exist, can you? But you can prove that something does exist because you've seen it, you've watched it. I think, and I've wrestled with this all the years I've had this job, it's one of the biggest light bulb moments that I've had. I think that what you have, if your politics are essentially, and this is going to sound a little bit naive, if what you have is, if you feel that you're drawn towards the underdog, okay, politically speaking, whether it's people who've got less money or less power or fewer rights, whatever it is, it's an essentially idealistic and well-meaning position that sees you side with the underdog, okay? It's why you might have been sort of secretly hoping Italy would have put a few more points on the board against England, even though you're a dyed-in-the-wool England fan. You could do that in rugby. You probably can't do it in association football. But do you see what I mean? You're drawn to the underdog. And therefore, I think when you look at the Middle East and you look at the numbers, you side with the underdog. You don't think Israel is the underdog. But that ignores history. Israel, or Jewish people, are history's underdogs in a way that very few other populations can recognize. It is a form of collective paranoia that informs support for Israel, but I don't mean that as a criticism. Imagine if your entire family tree had been threatened at every twig and every branch with, at best, exclusion and alienation, and at worst, a gas chamber. And Israel represents the place you know it can never happen again. The only place, I'm so sorry it's taken me so long to realise this. It does not in any way, shape or form make me an apologist for every aspect of the Likud party's foreign policies. But it makes me human to imagine what it would be like to look back over the history of your family, of your people, and to see persecution and prosecution at every single turn. And then suddenly, the front end of the last century, for the first time in 2,000 years, your people had somewhere to go where they would not wake up in the night to find people with torches bashing down their front doors, where they would never run the risk of having their neighbours hand them over to the Nazis to be taken to the death camps. That one country, for that one period, that this one point in Jewish history, has a relationship with Jewish people across the globe, not all of them, that the rest of us need to work harder to understand. And when Labour Party members apparently confuse this collective justify, it's not paranoia if they really are watching you, is it? We need a better word. when the Labour Party confuse that with... And some people suffer from an enthusiasm for the conflict, of course, but that's on both sides. When the Labour Party, elements of the Labour Party, drawn historically to the underdog, see Israel as an aggressor and fail utterly to understand its unique historical status. That's my view. And that suggests to me that the Labour Party's problem with anti-Semitism is a kind of anti-authoritarian error. Whether or not it is the kind of anti-Semitism that leads to Holocaust, I don't know. At this point, it's 11:16. I won't bore you anymore. At this point, I don't think it does. I don't think the people who try to talk about Israel being war criminals, or talk about the occupied territories, or talk about the plight of the Palestinian people in very passionate terms and very negative language employed about the actions of Israel, I don't think they believe that if you were born Jewish, you're inferior to them in the way that a proper Nazi does, or a right-wing anti-Semite. But, as my new catchphrase would attest, I could be wrong. And here is, just because Brexit has proved too cheerful and uplifting for us, we're having a crack at anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. I'd like you to tell me what it looks like, because I haven't encountered it, but then again, I'm not a member of the Labour Party. I can't really imagine a world in which I'd join any political party anymore, but I do know that Claire Cober, who has resigned as the leader of a Labour council, said the levels of anti-Semitism I've seen in the Labour Party are just astonishing. So what's she seen? She gives an example when she tried to propose a motion in support of the international definition of anti-Semitism, and she says she was shouted down. I was met with this wall of sound, many of them Labour Party members screaming, shouting, howling, trying to stop me speaking. And if I had to put in the line that perhaps goes in response to this, it would be a couple of people unhappy with me for suggesting, let me get this absolutely right, because this is, I think, even though it's so unfashionable, we should still try to focus on detail and accuracy. I'm just hearing that Laurie Love has won his appeal against extradition to the United States on hacking charges. That's great news. We may have a word with him later. A story that probably should have got more coverage. I'm not quite sure why it hasn't. But we will look at the... I want to find you this one. Here it is. I'm sorry, James. All my sympathy to Jewish people's awful history, but that doesn't excuse what the Israeli government do to Palestinians. I'm not having it. Dave, I never said it did I? I said my understanding of where this, what I chose to refer to as collective paranoia, with the caveat that it's not paranoia, it really is a constant threat and fear, that explains some support of policies that I don't support in a way that I didn't understand before. And I don't think that's difficult to understand. Brendan's in Portsmouth. Brendan, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. Good morning. I certainly don't think the Labour Party has a problem with the recruitment of Jewish MPs, that's for sure. I mean, you could name Ruth Smeeth, David Miliband, Ed Miliband, etc. But I think the relationship with the Jewish community is somewhat of a paradox, really.
Go on. Are you a party member yourself?
I'm not, James. No. I think there's.
So what are the? I mean, when I say what does anti-Semitism look like in the context of the British post-2015 Labour Party, do we know?
Well, I mean, we saw, I think, Ruth Smeeth get up and walk out of one of Jeremy Corbyn's speeches, or it was widely broadcast on the media at the time. I think that the problem is becoming more pertinent for the Labour Party since the advent of the Momentum movement, really, because I think a core of that is all about free Palestine. And I do think there are injustices there that they feel Jeremy Corbyn represents with his sort of like close links to the Middle East, really, and I think some of them, to an extent.
I'm hearing a lot of. I wasn't across the Ruth Smeeth example. That was at the Chakrabarti report, wasn't it? When she walked out.
I think you're right.
Saying that it hadn't really gone far enough. That of course is her, as you point out. That's her prerogative. But in terms of anti-Semitism, not in terms of perhaps in some people's view a misguided or an excessive amount of sympathy and support for the people of Palestine. That's different from anti-Semitism, and yet I wonder whether we live in a world where we can't separate the two anymore.
I think the Labour Party are going to have a real problem separating the two, but On the other hand, I don't think there is a party in the United Kingdom at the moment with closer links to the Jewish community. I think the Labour Party is probably most of the Jewish communities sort of like home. I mean, look to Israel itself and you'll see that they've got their own Labour Party with close links to the UK version too. So I think the longer we go on with this, the more of a problem it is going to become. And I think Jeremy Corbyn has let us all know where his loyalties lie, and I happen to think that his silence on this matter speaks volumes, and he is probably going to come down, dare I say, more on the anti-Semitic side.
This is why I keep pushing you for evidence and examples, and I appreciate it can be a fairly thankless task, but I have this. I mean, crikey, Len McCluskey speaks often undiluted nonsense, but I do see more of this in anti-Corbyn media, which is all of it. And I don't know what it is that I'm supposed to be looking at. Do you see what I mean? So Claire Kober shouting down an attempt to endorse an international definition of being shouted down on that. I guess what I'm talking about, when I hear the words anti-Semitic, I think of pogroms, and I think of holocausts, and I don't think that is the phrase to describe what you're describing in the Labour Party.
These days, isn't it? It's more boycotting SodaStream and things like that. I think that is the modern day version of what some might say in Israel is anti-Semitism.
But they don't. But this is it's my confusion. I'm not hectoring you. I just think that if anti-Semitism is what leads towards the Holocaust, then that's clearly not what the Labour Party are being accused of. It's something different, or do I sound like I'm splitting hairs now?
Well, I think no. I don't think I wouldn't go as far as to say that this is heading towards Holocaust.
Well, don't laugh, because that's why it's such a toxic accusation, isn't it? Otherwise, you could wash it off. You could move on. It wouldn't matter. But you see in a headline, the only problem that's bigger than sexism in the Labour Party is anti-Semitism. Then immediately, I think of anti-Semitism's worst historical manifestations.
If you went to a Momentum march or something like this and looked around at the Socialist Worker Brigade and the people that wear those halifas, you know, those checkered scarves that they wear around their necks and
yes, of course.
their mouths,
yes,
and things like that Arafat used to wear, you'll find an awful lot of those around. And I think
mate, that's a scarf. It's not
makes the Jewish. I know it's a scarf, but it represents the Palestinian Liberation Organisation. And
supporting the PLO, mate, wouldn't make you anti-Semitic. You could argue that it makes you anti. Well, then why do you keep mentioning these as examples of anti-Semitism?
I've lived in Israel for a year, and I can see it from their perspective.
I can as well, but why would a scarf be evidence of anti-Semitism?
Because it is symbolic of the terrorism that they faced over the years.
But there's a debate about where terrorism begins and liberation movements or freedom fights. And this is why I keep coming back to the Holocaust. You can't seriously be claiming that wearing a scarf makes you sympathetic to the motives that led to millions of people being murdered in the Second World War.
No, but those people that wear the scarf certainly aren't sympathetic to those people that were involved in the Holocaust.
Well, I don't think you can. That's where I think you've lost it, mate. You can't say that. You're saying that if I now wore a scarf, that would mean I didn't feel sorry for victims of Holocaust.
I think,
mate, Brendan, mate, that's no. I'm using your own examples, and that is where it goes, and that's what worries me. With respect, Brendan, I don't know what your position or agenda, if you have one, is, but that seems to me where you're going to end up if you go down this road. I wasn't familiar with the presumably Arabic word to describe it, but I mean, crikey, everyone wore them in the late 80s. I didn't realise there was a political subtext. Clearly, if you're on a march, there is a political subtext to everything you do. But I don't know that I can live with the idea of somebody who feels that Israel's foreign policy in the Middle East is wrong no, mate, get lost. Somebody who thinks that Israel's Middle East policy is wrong, or Israel's attitude to the occupied territories or towards the people of Palestine or people in Gaza, someone who thinks that it's wrong doesn't have sympathy for victims of Holocaust, is where you just went, as a result of a scarf. No wonder I'm confused. It's coming up to 11:30. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. The question is simple. I have enormous sympathy for you if you want to tell me that it doesn't exist, because I don't know how you could possibly prove that. And the first person to tell me that it does exist has, I would cautiously suggest, failed to provide any evidence whatsoever. So what is this anti-Semitism in the Labour Party? And should we be calling it that if it bears no resemblance whatsoever to the sort of tides and movements that led to the Holocaust? That's taken me half an hour to work out what my problem with this is. And as ever, it's a problem with the words, isn't it? I'm not sure whether the fact that I seem to have upset everybody means I've got this horribly wrong or horribly right. An awful lot of Labour supporters furious at me apparently towing the fake news right-wing line that the Labour Party has a problem with anti-Semitism. But also, I don't know how representative these groups are or who they speak for, but the Sussex Friends of Israel saying that I'm asking the most ridiculous of ridiculous questions. What does anti-Semitism in the Labour Party look like? It looks like anti-Semitism, pure hate and evil directed towards the Jewish people. It's just wearing new clothes these days, which is why I'm asking for evidence, because that's just disgusting. And the idea that when people talk about Jeremy Corbyn's core support being anti-Semitic, the phrase to me means and indeed the first caller, it went along with this idea that simply by wearing a scarf popularised by Yasser Arafat, you're somehow displaying your lack of sympathy for victims of the Holocaust. That's what I'm asking for. Because if that is evidence that's out there, I want to man the barricades. You honestly think that there are people in the Labour Party who are espousing similar views to the ones that caused the Holocaust? That should be the only story in town if it were true. But the shortage, perhaps, of evidence suggests that while there's something pretty grim going on, it's not quite what we are being encouraged to believe. But I don't know. As I say, I've got no skin in this game. 11:36 is the time. David is in Bermondsey. David, what do you think?
Nice to speak to you, James. I am a Labour Party member. I'm very active. I'm one of these people who came back to the Labour Party after many years because of Jeremy Corbyn. And the idea that the Labour Party is now anti-Semitic is disgusting. We're about social justice for everyone. Obviously,
if I said to you that there's no smoke without fire, would I sound stupid? Because and I'm quite cynical about media at the moment, but this is a Labour council leader saying the only bigger problem Labour's got than sexism is anti-Semitism. That's not...
I would take a big pinch of salt with what Claire Kober says on her way out from being booted out of the local party for pushing through a lot of privatisation of local land that was deeply opposed by everyone on the ground.
So it's not quite that clean cut, but so now we're saying that people whose political position we disagree with shouldn't be listened to at all, and everything they say is discredited by definition of our disagreement.
No, that's not what I'm saying at all. I think when the party increases so quickly, so vastly, and has pulled in previous people who haven't been involved, you're going to get some undesirables, let's say, of people with more extremist views coming in. That is why you have a vetting system. That's why you have a way to report these people. And if people espouse these things, they should be rejected from the party and never allowed to return. But I personally have not seen that in my local area.
Okay.
I've seen some very positive debates, including on anti-Semitism laws, but it's more about the discussion of the definition that revolves around people shouting each other down of the wording, not the idea of it not being there. I've been there where people argue about conjunctive words within a proposal, let alone the idea of anti-Semitism being pushed through.
So what's your theory then? And I don't mean to sound glib, do you think it's been entirely concocted, or that there's a tiny seed of... and it's always going to be this conflation between the State of Israel and the Jewish people, and once you allow that conflation to go unchallenged, any criticism of the State of Israel can be represented as anti-Semitism, and so that then gets fanned and magnified and exaggerated and embellished until suddenly the Labour Party is being portrayed as a kind of Nazi party in waiting.
Well, there's no doubt it's the new stick the right-wing media are choosing to pit Jeremy Corbyn and momentum with. However, I do think there are probably some people who have got extreme views. And this is going to sound awful, but goodness me, in for a penny, in for a pound. How can a left-winger be anti-Semitic like that? I genuinely don't understand it. I would love to meet some of them so I could question them and work out their logic.
But this, for me, is the crucial distinction between between the accidents of birth, the elements of ourselves and our identity over which we have no control, and the ones over which we do. So I don't believe at this point that there are people... I just don't believe there are people in the Labour Party who generally consider Jewish people to be somehow inferior to them, biologically or genetically or in any other way. Do you?
Well, I think when you've got 500,000 members, you'll have one of every kind of...
well, then that would apply to any grouping of 500,000 people. So perhaps I should say a particular... Precisely. I don't believe the Labour Party has a particular problem with this.
No, I think it's quite representative of the UK population at large.
Well, I'm so naive. Do you know what, mate? I'd go the other way. I'd say surely the Labour Party, of all places, would be less likely to harbour these people than other political movements.
From what I've found every type of person in my local borough are now wanting to be involved because there's more grassroots happening. It doesn't matter where your politics are, it's about what the people want. And I think that's what certainly I'm pushing for at a local level. And I think that's what's getting more people involved. So I think it's more representative now than less.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and then you sort of wonder where the truth is in the context of coverage. I do find myself looking at the brouhaha at the weekend involving Jacob Rees-Mogg, which is, by the way, getting more and more interesting with regard to that fella in the white shirt who appeared to be rather in the middle of things. But that getting more coverage and Theresa May making announcements to stop harassment when actually I think there were comments made in the House of Commons. There were certainly comments made during the last London mayoral election that explained to me in very simple terms why that terrorist sentenced last week, Darren Osborne, had Sadiq Khan and Jeremy Corbyn's names on his hit list. I don't know. Do you see what I mean? I worry that the coverage is skewing everything, but this one merits further examination. Toby's in East Finchley. Toby, what do you think?
Oh, hi, James.
Hello, Toby.
Mine's a very specific, or a couple of specific anecdotes. I'm a retired teacher. I now work in the sort of photographic area in a studio.
Yes.
Young Labour supporter, a Labour Party member. I am a Labour supporter myself.
Right.
Came back from a meeting, fired up. And just in the course of discussion, it was after Hilary Benn made a speech,
yeah.
and he just used the term, which threw me a bit. And he said, "It's the Jew lobby," and I've heard this. I've heard this.
That's stone cold sick.
Well, it did surprise me. He's a very bright and a really lovely young man, and you know, and I'd want to encourage young people to join the Labour Party and so on. I just kind of asked him to elaborate on that, and. It really concerned me. His knowledge, I think he was conflating the sort of Israel and the Jew. I think he mixed. I'm not sure that it is possible to completely disentangle them personally. Certainly, when I asked him, and I think it links to what you said earlier about the underdog.
What did he say though? When you asked him to explain what he means by the Jew lobby? God. I don't even know that we should be saying these phrases on the radio, because I'm increasingly worried that sometimes you validate the toxicity by debating it. It's the mistake I think we've made with the white supremacists, the far right, the Islamofascists, all of them. By debating it, you run it up a flagpole. But what did he mean? Did he explain it to you?
Well, he became quite defensive and apologetic.
Right.
And,
so you think he just parroted something that he'd heard earlier?
I think so. I think he was kind of fueled up. There was obviously discussion about it was going on about Syria and our involvement and about Israel, and I think it was just things that he'd heard. He was a young man, his early 20s, and he kind of backtracked. I did ask him a couple of questions just out of interest. I asked him what he thought the Jewish. By the way, my card's on the table. Yeah. I'm an atheist, James.
Were you born? Were your parents members of any faith?
Well, I very kind of loose, Jewish. And,
well, just let me run something by you, and forgive me if this sounds a little crass.
No.
If we were returning to the days of Holocausts and pogroms, you wouldn't get to be an atheist, would you, Toby?
I wouldn't, absolutely not. No, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. No, I sort of moved away from the faith and so on.
Sure.
But just what I heard from him, and I just asked him. I've got a little bit of knowledge about it. I asked the population of the Jewish population what he thought the Jewish population of the UK was, and he said 4 million. I think it's something like about 40,000.
Yes.
And so on.
But even if it was 4 million, so what?
Well, I think it's just about...
The idea that you all agree with each other about everything is a little bit contrary to my experiences, to say the very least, as it was with any other group of people.
I think it's about perceptions, and I think it's what you said earlier about the underdogs, and I'm not sure, and I think it is perceptions of who is the underdog in the Middle East and so on, and I think just in terms of numerically and population. So,
and numerically in terms of casualties and deaths. I mean, we have to be pretty bold about that. It is, if you were simply looking at numbers and trying to work out which side you would be on, you should be on, then most people would come down on the side of the people that had sustained by far the most deaths and casualties. But then you look into causation and causality, then you look into history, then you look into other elements. So the problem is, I am a pretty round critic of Netanyahu's school of politics, of Likud foreign policy in particular. But I'm sounding to some people on social media as if I'm defending them simply by... It's so nuts, this, isn't it? It's so complicated.
Yeah, I mean, I must say, I don't think... I mean, I did, having looked at, I think Jeremy Corbyn, I think there is a problem. By the way, I don't just, we're not just talking about that the person who's just resigned from Haringey. I saw Stella Creasy on TV yesterday morning also suggesting, did you see her? And she was also talking about anti-Semitism. It is, I've listened to Tristan Hunt, and these people, it's not just the odd individual. These are people that are experiencing it across the board. I think for a lot of Jewish people, the Labour Party is not their home anymore, which I think is very sad, as your previous caller said. Also, from personal experience, some of the kids that I taught who were Jewish and went to university undoubtedly suffered anti-Semitism. They were in a minority, and they found the experience pretty uncomfortable, I would say.
What sort of things, briefly, Toby? I've got a friend called Toby. I call him Tobes. I hope you don't feel I was overly familiar just then. What sort of things? I mean, it just in terms of endeavouring to be pro-Israel proved to be a problem. Well, again, that doesn't clarify things for me. There's clearly a conflation on an epic scale, but I want to know more about the Labour Party's particular problems, and simply employing a phrase like Jew lobby after attending a meeting, albeit that the anecdotes do not data make, that's pretty gross. You know, the fun we've had recently trying to map this fetishisation of offence. Commodification probably is a better word. Everything's about being offended. Do you reckon we could get this one up and running? Amazon was branded inhumane yesterday after it was revealed the internet giant sells live lobsters for home delivery in Britain. Can we get the Lobster Liberation Front up and running this week? Or do we think we've got enough to be outraged about? There is some rather good news. The alleged computer hacker Laurie Love has been at the High Court today to find out whether or not his challenge to an extradition order to the United States has proved successful. Lucy Hoff is there for LBC. Lucy, what's going on?
Well, James, there were cheers in the courtroom and jubilant scenes from the family and friends of Laurie Love in what I think is a surprise judgment even for them, even though they've been involved in this lengthy legal battle against this extradition of Laurie Love, the computer hacker facing charges of cyber hacking in the US. The Lord Chief Justice said he'd accepted the arguments made in this appeal against this extradition. They say that if there are fears for his mental health, that sending him to the US would be oppressive, and that there are fears that he might take his own life. Now, speaking outside the court, Mr. Love said he was delighted.
We're very happy and relieved. We're very thankful for the High Court, for the judges, for their wisdom and discernment. Thankful for all of the support that we've had, without which I'm not sure I would have made it this far. Thankful for your interest as members of the Free Press, without whom we cannot have a justice system. I'm sorry, people... Yeah, okay, so... We will have a press conference down the road at the offices of Keynes Hodner where I can speak a bit more, but right now we're just very thankful for everyone's help and support, and now we must clear the gangway. And also, I'd just like to say imparting that this
Give us a minute.
This decision obviously affects my life, but the reason I've gone through this ordeal is not just to save myself from being kidnapped and locked up for 99 years in a country I've never visited, but it's to set a precedent whereby this will not happen to other people in the future. That if there is suspected criminality, then it will be tried here in the UK, and America will not try to exercise exorbitant extraterritorial jurisdiction. So we're hopeful that other people may be able to rely on this verdict to ensure that they're treated more humanely by the justice system. So I think we need to clear the way now. Thanks, guys.
Larry Love, the alleged computer hacker, speaking outside the High Court there a few moments ago after, successfully challenging his extradition to the US. He has Asperger's as well, which added to the family's fears that he could be at risk or indeed harm himself if he was extradited to a country which you just heard him describe himself as never having visited. You know, it's funny, isn't it? I haven't followed that story as closely as perhaps I should have done. He stood accused of having kind of purloined data from various government agencies, the Federal Reserve, the Army, the Defense Department, NASA, and the FBI, like a kind of internet magpie going around proving that he's managed to break into protected things by taking stuff out of them. But we sat here about 5 years ago and asked a question about how online criminality should be prosecuted. Very simply, at the time, these are the subjects that occasionally really throw up fascinating visions of the future. Because I said, look, if you are in Britain and you hack something in America, because Gary McKinnon was another great example of this, where should you be prosecuted? I don't think it's clean cut, that. And that's why this case is so interesting, because precedent is a huge proportion of law. And this appears to establish a precedent that while he may well be prosecuted in this country, he won't be extradited to a sovereign state that has very different laws, including a death penalty, of course, although that wasn't on the agenda here, but generally has very different laws and penalties from us. 11:55 is the time. There is a website or a Twitter account that dedicates itself to identifying examples of anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. I haven't come across it before. It's called @NashaJew, Nasha with a G. And they have some incredibly damning examples of mostly councillors indulging in the kind of behaviour that actually does merit comparison with some of the worst instances of anti-Semitism that we've seen historically. And I will immerse myself in that, and that's why I've given you the account name so that you can look at it yourself. I'm loath to read out anything that's not linked to other sources, just because I haven't come across you before. But the evidence there is more compelling than anything anybody's been able to provide on the phones. So we'll go back to the phones in the hope of possibly emulating that, or not the hope. I don't want it to be true, because it's a horrible thought to think that these feelings are abroad again. But you only have to glance across the Atlantic and see Holocaust deniers and paedophiles being endorsed by British politicians and being put on ballot papers to realise how near the scary stuff can be at all times. Bella's in Bethnal Green. Bella, what do you think?
Hi, James.
Hello, Bella.
I'm a first-time caller, and also, as I'm about to share, English is not my first language, so I hope I'm not going to lose my facility of language.
I'm sure you'll be fine.
I was born and raised in Israel, and I moved here when I was 19 in 2003, and I am a Labour Party member.
Right.
I wouldn't say that I have encountered any anti-Semitism per se in the Labour Party, but I definitely have been feeling uncomfortable to share where I'm from. That is being said, that is something that I also feel generally when I meet people, because in a sense I am I left Israel partly as a choice because I was very left-wing. It was very hard for me to take part, not actively to take part, but, to sit still when the occupation and everything that is happening in Israel has been happening. And as I am feeling quite mixed in emotion, there's a lot of misinformation and misunderstanding about the conflict. It's such a complex historical issue, and what I came across really is a lot of misinformation, and some of it was quite infuriating. So when I was in the recent conference, queuing for some of the events in the World Transform Festival. People came with leaflets with some literature that I have to say wasn't official Labour Party literature by any means, but things indicated that Zionism is essentially the project of the settlement, that Israeli people or Jewish people aspire to, just conquer everything that they can, and it was really infuriating, and some of it was very badly written as well.
That can offend all of us, Bella.
But I think there's just, I feel very mixed about my identity, about my background, because, there's no avoiding the fact that, Sorry.
No, that's all right. I mean, if you're confused, what chance have I got?
Exactly. I do think it's a part of a wider sentiment in society, and I do feel, same as the other way around. There is this. But
the thing I need
mm-hmm.
is help in understanding this distinction between
mm-hmm.
rightly or wrongly finding
mm-hmm.
Israel's policies in Gaza and elsewhere and the occupied territories
mm-hmm.
profoundly wrong, which I sense you do.
I do, yes.
So you could never be accused of anti-Semitism when you say, or can you? Do you become what I sometimes have seen described as a self-hating Jew when you criticise Israel?
Well, actually, within the discourse in Israel, which is quite toxic in the media, I could very easily be described as anti-Semitic.
Despite being Jewish?
Yes.
Just because you object to some of the policies in
I could. I mean, sadly, I could.
So how do I know who is actually judging you according to your birth as being deserving of pain, and somebody who thinks that you are from a country that's doing unjustifiable things?
I think it's a very blurry line.
And does the blurring of it help the people who support Israel's foreign policy, or does it help the people who oppose it? It seems to me to almost exclusively help the people who support it. How would you be helped by the blurring of the line?
I don't know.
No, nor do I. Do you know, we've done an hour on this, and I feel that we've barely drawn breath, Bella, but I'm grateful to you for your contributions. I hope you're still listening next time we come to it, which could be sooner rather than later. It's 12:01. We will return to that conversation, just because life's not complicated and ugly enough at the moment. This rise, alleged rise of anti-Semitism in the ranks of the Labour Party. We did that whole conversation without mentioning Ken Livingstone, of course, who did seem to draw a lot of attention to the issue with some incredibly, I found, ignorant comments. But the idea that Jewish people are somehow born inferior and therefore deserve to die, come on. I suppose just naively, I can't quite believe that those feelings would be festering and fermenting among people who historically or politically like to see themselves as upholders of equality. 6 minutes after 12 is the time.